Foy, Belgium, the 13th of January, 1945. At minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, Easy Company soldiers heard their dead friends calling their names through the snow, men they'd buried weeks before. I am the War Maestro, and tonight I bring you the battle that history recorded as won, but for the men who fought it will never, ever end. Blood freezes at minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Private William Billy Carter discovered this as he watched a crimson droplet from his nose crystallize before hitting the snow. The men of the 101st Airborne Division called themselves the Battered Bastards of Bastogne now, a brotherhood forged in the frozen hell of encirclement, starvation, and relentless German artillery. "I can still hear them screaming," whispered Carter to no one in particular, as he stared across the 250 yards of snow-blanketed killing field, separating the tree line from Foy. The small Belgian village, barely a cluster of stone buildings, had become their objective this morning. Behind him, a medic was collecting dog tags from men who would never see home again. At 900 hours on January 13th, 1945, Easy Company moved out. The crunch of boots on frozen ground, the labored breathing of men expecting to die, the weight of a rifle that hadn't been truly dry in weeks. Lieutenant Norman Dyke led them forward, a man already broken before the first German MG-42 opened fire. The machine gun's distinctive sound, like canvas tearing, sent men diving into snow turned red. Carter watched Dyke freeze, becoming a statue as his radio operator's head exploded beside him, painting his face with gore that froze almost instantly in the bitter cold. "We're gonna die here," muttered Private Joseph Grady, his eyes wide with terror. "We're all gonna die here." But they didn't. Captain Winters sent Lieutenant Ronald Spears, a man whispered to have executed German prisoners, to relieve Dyke. Spears charged across the battlefield like a demon, bullets seemingly unable to touch him. Under his command, Easy Company surged forward, clearing houses with grenades and bayonets. By midday, Foy was theirs. The battle was over. Except it wasn't. As darkness claimed the village that night, Carter huddled against a crumbling wall, his journal open despite numb fingers. The spine of the book had stopped a piece of shrapnel that morning. Another inch, and it would have been his heart. "Something's wrong in Foy," he wrote. "Victory feels hollow, empty." Then he heard it. They all did. Artillery that made no impact. Gunfire without muzzle flashes. And voices. God help them. Voices they recognized calling from the darkness beyond the village perimeter. "Carter? Grady?" The voices echoed through the trees. "Help us. We're still out here." But that was impossible. Those men calling their names had died 2 weeks ago at Bastogne. "You think we won today?" Grady asked, his breath hanging in the frigid air between them. Carter watched as a flare illuminated the tree line, revealing nothing but pristine snow where he'd distinctly heard footsteps moments before. "I think," he said slowly, "that whatever's happening in Foy, winning might be the worst thing that could have happened to us." Fox Company reports all quiet on their sector. Lieutenant Lipton informed the gathered NCOs inside the bombed-out church that served as Easy Company's command post. The frozen corpse of a German soldier had been propped against the corner, his uniform needed for one of the American snipers. Nobody had time to move the body. "We maintain a standard perimeter watch tonight, 2-hour rotations." Sergeant Martin consulted his clipboard. Carter Grady, first watch, western approach. Jenkins, Webster, North Road. Benson, Malarkey, eastern tree line. The briefing continued, but Carter was fixated on the German corpse. Something about the way frost crystals had formed across the dead man's eyelashes, like tiny diamonds. "Intelligence says Krauts are retreating, not regrouping," Lipton concluded. Questions. The men were silent. After 6 weeks in the Ardennes, they'd learned to keep their mouths shut and their heads down. The church bell tower rang 2,200 hours as Carter and Grady took position at a shattered farmhouse overlooking a snow-covered orchard. Their breath fogged in the starlight. Standard procedure. 1 man watches, 1 man rests, alternating every 30 minutes. Carter took first surveillance. "You've got that 1,000-yard stare, Billy," Grady remarked, huddling near their small, sheltered heat tab that provided warmth without visible flame. Seen too many ghosts? Carter didn't answer immediately. The word ghosts hung between them like another presence. Remember Peterson? 3rd Platoon? Caught that 88 shell outside Bastogne. What about him? I saw him today, during the attack. Carter's voice was flat, running alongside Spears when we hit the village. Grady's laugh was brittle. Combat fatigue's got you seeing things. Peterson caught a direct hit. There wasn't enough left to fill a helmet. I know what Carter froze. In the orchard below, something moved. A shadow detached from the trees, followed by another. Human silhouettes, stumbling through knee-deep snow. Carter raised his binoculars. The figures wore American uniforms, but moved wrong, lurching, disjointed. Lipton said Fox Company has the western perimeter locked down, Grady whispered. Those can't be ours. Carter keyed his radio. Command, this is Outpost 3. Multiple unknown contacts, Western Orchard. Americans, maybe 8 men. Request instructions. The radio crackled. Outpost 3, command. Negative on American patrols in your sector. All friendlies accounted for. Maintain position. Report movements. The figures halted simultaneously, as if hearing something. Then, as one, they turned their faces upward, directly toward Carter and Grady's position. Jesus Christ, Grady hissed. They see us. Carter adjusted his binoculars, focusing on the lead figure's face. The cold seemed to intensify around them, the temperature plummeting beyond what even January in the Ardennes should permit. Through the lenses, he finally made out the man's features. It was Peterson, his face partially missing where the 88 shell had caught him. Before Carter could speak, a distant explosion illuminated the night, a white phosphorus shell detonating beyond the tree line. When the momentary light faded, the orchard stood empty. No tracks marred the pristine snow. The January midnight brought a cold that transformed breathing into an act of violence. Each inhalation felt like swallowing glass. Carter and Grady had been relieved at midnight, yet neither man found sleep in the crowded basement of their commandeered Belgian home. You need to report what we saw, Grady whispered, his words barely audible over the collective snoring of exhausted paratroopers. Carter stared at the ceiling. And tell them what? That we saw Peterson walking with half his head missing? That'll earn us a one-way ticket to the psychiatric ward. At precisely 300 hours, the air split open. The unmistakable banshee wail of incoming 88mm artillery shells tore through the night, followed by the thunderous percussion of impacts that shook dust from the ceiling beams. Men jolted awake, grabbing rifles and helmets through muscle memory honed by weeks of interrupted sleep. Sergeant Martin was already at the stairs. Easy, company. Positions. Move. Move. Carter found himself in a hastily organized defensive line along the village's western edge. The artillery continued, regular, methodical, walking its way through predetermined coordinates. The sound was terrifying in its precision. The German 88s had always been disturbingly accurate. Except there were no explosions, no buildings collapsing, no screams of the wounded, no geysers of dirt and snow. What the hell? Lieutenant Lipton raised his binoculars, scanning the fields. I hear impacts but see nothing. The radio crackled to life. All units command. Status report. Command, Easy Company. Taking artillery fire. Western sector. No visible impacts. Request instructions. A long pause. Then, Easy Company command. Negative on artillery fire. All sectors report quiet. Maintain positions. Confusion spread through the line. Men exchanged glances, fingers tight on triggers. The sounds continued, shells screaming overhead, explosions in the distance. Yet nothing moved in the snow-covered landscape beyond Foy. Then came the voices. Medic, medic. Oh God, my legs. I need suppressing fire. They're flanking left. Easy Company. Fall back. Fall back. The cries echoed from the darkness beyond the village perimeter. American voices, using proper radio protocols, calling out map coordinates that corresponded perfectly with their current positions. Carter felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck as he recognized Lieutenant Dyke's voice among them, screaming for a runner that never came. Sir, he turned to Lipton. That's Lieutenant Dyke, but he was evacuated to the field hospital at Bastogne after the attack. Before Lipton could respond, a flare burst overhead, bathing the landscape in harsh white light. In that frozen moment, they all saw them, dozens of American paratroopers, charging across the snow-covered field toward Foy, the same field they had crossed that morning. The same men who had fought beside them. Some were missing limbs. Others moved with the awkward gait of men already dead. As the flare sputtered out, the figures vanished, leaving the field empty once more. Sergeant Martin's voice was barely a whisper. Either we're all going crazy together, or something is very wrong in Foy. The radio in Lipton's hand crackled again. A single voice came through, distorted, distant, yet unmistakable. "This is Captain Winters. We are pinned down outside Foy. Request immediate artillery support on the following coordinates." They were the exact coordinates where Easy Company now stood. Dawn arrived with a reluctance that matched the men's dread. No one had slept after the phantom artillery barrage. Easy Company moved through morning duties with mechanical precision, cleaning weapons, checking ammunition, distributing rations, their minds elsewhere. Captain Winters arrived from Battalion HQ at 900 hours, his face grim as he conferred with Lipton inside the church command post. Word spread quickly. Battalion considered the reports of nighttime disturbances to be symptoms of battle fatigue. The official explanation was acoustic anomalies caused by temperature inversions common to the Ardennes in winter. "Acoustic anomalies don't call out your name," Grady muttered as they choked down powdered eggs from their mess kits. By midday, the first man broke. Private James Holloway had been a replacement, joining Easy Company just before the Ardennes offensive. They found him outside the village perimeter, frantically digging in the snow with bloody hands, his entrenching tool abandoned nearby. "We left them," he sobbed as medics restrained him. "They're still fighting out there. Can't you hear them? They're still fighting." Holloway was sedated and evacuated to the field hospital at Bastogne, diagnosed with combat exhaustion. But he wasn't the last. That afternoon, Sergeant David Collins emptied half a magazine into the tree line, swearing he saw German infantry advancing. The patrol sent to investigate found nothing but pristine snow and spent cartridges. By evening, 6 more men had reported hearing voices calling their names from beyond the village perimeter. 3 claimed to have seen familiar faces in windows of buildings they knew were empty. Lieutenant Spears called the company's sergeants together at dusk. "HQ is sending a psychiatric team tomorrow," he informed them, his voice characteristically flat. "Until then, we maintain discipline, double the watch. No one leaves the perimeter alone." As the meeting disbanded, Carter approached Lipton. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Lipton nodded, dark circles beneath his eyes betraying his own exhaustion. "What if?" Carter hesitated. "What if it's not battle fatigue? What if something happened during the attack yesterday? Something we can't explain?" Lipton studied him for a long moment. "Carter, I've been in combat since day. I've seen shell shock, combat fatigue, men who just couldn't take it anymore. This is different." He looked around to ensure they weren't overheard. "But until I have a rational explanation, we follow orders and keep the men together." Later, in the cramped attic room where Carter's squad was billeted, he found Private Webster poring over maps of the area. "What's that for?" Carter asked. Webster didn't look up. "I'm marking the locations where people reported incidents. There's a pattern forming." Carter examined the map. Red circles indicated sighting locations. Blue marked where auditory phenomena were reported. The pattern was unmistakable. They formed a perfect recreation of Easy Company's attack route from the previous day, but in reverse. "It's like," Webster whispered, "like we're fighting the battle backwards." A scream from outside cut through the night. They rushed to the window in time to see Sergeant Martin dragging a wild-eyed private back from the village edge. "They called my name," the private was shouting. "They know we left them behind." Carter watched as the man was restrained, his eyes drawn to the darkness beyond Foy. For just a moment, he thought he saw figures moving between the trees, familiar silhouettes wearing the jump boots and M1 helmets of the 101st Airborne. They were watching the village, waiting. Carter realized with sudden, cold clarity that the Battle of Foy wasn't over. It was still being fought, not with bullets and blood, but with something far more terrifying: memory. The night deepened like a wound. Carter volunteered for the midnight watch, positioned in the same farmhouse where he and Grady had first seen the apparitions. This time, Sergeant Martin had assigned him to partner with Private Webster, the scholarly paratrooper who might make sense of what was happening. "Battalion thinks we're experiencing mass hysteria," Webster said, methodically cleaning his Mon Garand, despite having done so 3 times already that evening. A documented phenomenon where psychological stress causes shared delusions. "That what you think?" Carter asked, scanning the orchard through field glasses. Webster hesitated. "I think something in Foy is bleeding through, like 2 photographic negatives overlapped." The temperature plummeted suddenly. Their breath solidified in front of them, hanging like miniature storm clouds. The radio on Webster's back crackled, static at first, then fragments of transmission. "Easy company, falling back, casualties." The voice faded in and out, distorted yet recognizable as Lieutenant Dyke's. "That's impossible," Webster whispered. "Dyke was relieved yesterday. He's in a field hospital." The farmhouse door creaked open behind them. Both men spun, rifles raised. The figure standing in the doorway wore a frost-covered airborne uniform. Ice crystals had formed in his eyebrows and along the edges of his helmet. His breath did not fog the air. "Lieutenant Dyke?" Carter's voice cracked. The apparition's eyes found Carter's. Private Carter. His voice sounded wrong, hollow, distant, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Why did you leave us out there?" Webster fired. The bullet passed through Dyke's form and splintered the doorframe behind him. The lieutenant's image flickered like a candle flame in wind. "You're not here," Carter said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "You were evacuated after the attack. This isn't real." "The attack never ended," Dyke replied. His uniform began to darken with spreading stains, blood, freezing as it appeared. "We're still out there, still fighting, still dying." He extended a hand toward them. Frost formed along his fingertips, spreading up his arm. "Come back for us." Webster grabbed the radio. "Command, Outpost 3. We have a situation." The transmission died in a burst of static. Outside, the distinctive sound of MG-42 machine guns opened up, the same guns they had faced during yesterday's attack. Artillery began to fall, the impacts shaking snow from the rafters. Through the window, Carter saw them, dozens of paratroopers, advancing across the snow toward Foy. Their movements were disjointed, some missing limbs, others dragging themselves forward. All were men from Easy Company. All were encased in frost. Carter recognized each face. Men who had fought beside him yesterday. Men who had survived the attack. "You left a part of yourselves out there," DK said, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "The battle carved away pieces of your souls. Those pieces are still fighting, still dying, over and over." Webster was frantically working the radio dial, trying to reach command. "This isn't happening. This isn't happening. You have to make a choice," Dyke continued, his form growing more transparent with each word. "Return to the battlefield and end it, or let the battle continue forever." He began to fade, the frost on his uniform sublimating into the air. The line between the living and the dead is thin in places like this, places where too much death happened too quickly. As Dyke's apparition disappeared completely, the sounds of battle outside reached a crescendo, then cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it felt like another presence in the room. Carter realized he was gripping his rifle so tightly his fingers had gone numb. "Webster," he said quietly, "I think I know what we need to do." Webster's eyes were wide, his scholarly demeanor shattered by what he'd witnessed. "What?" "We need to go back to where it started, where the battle began." Carter checked his ammunition. "We need to end it." Sergeant Martin's face hardened as Carter and Webster explained what they'd seen. "So you're suggesting we go back to the battlefield because a ghost told you to? Have you lost your minds?" They stood in the churchyard command post, the first gray light of dawn illuminating the frost-rimed stones around them. Sleep deprivation had hollowed the eyes of every man present. Captain Winters had been called back to Battalion HQ, leaving Lipton in charge. A fortunate circumstance, as Lipton at least seemed willing to listen. "Sir," Carter persisted, "something happened out there. Not just to Dyke, but to all of us. the battle. It's still being fought somehow. Webster unfolded his map, now marked with every reported incident. The pattern is unmistakable. Everything centers on where Lieutenant Dyke froze during the attack. Lipton studied the map, then looked up at the brightening sky. The psychiatric team arrives at noon. Until then, we maintain our positions and follow protocol. By noon, more men will break, Carter argued. Whatever's happening is getting stronger. A private rushed into the churchyard, his helmet askew. Sir, perimeter breach, eastern sector. Private Jackson just walked into the minefield. They found Jackson standing motionless in the snow beyond the village edge, 50 yards into what military intelligence had marked as a German defensive minefield. Incredibly, he remained unharmed. Jackson, Lipton called through a bullhorn. Stand absolutely still. We're sending EOD. Jackson turned slowly, his face vacant. They're all around me, he called back, his voice eerily calm. The men we left, they're showing me the way through. He took another step forward. No explosion came. There are no mines, Webster whispered. There never were. Before Lipton could stop him, Carter was moving, sprinting toward Jackson through the snow. With each step, he braced for the explosion that would tear him apart, but it never came. He reached Jackson, grabbed his arm. Let's go back, he urged. Jackson's eyes found his, suddenly sharp with recognition. Carter? They want us back where it happened, where the line broke. Together they trudged through the snow, following Jackson's invisible guides. Behind them, Webster had convinced Lipton to send a squad for backup. 8 men formed a cautious column, following Carter and Jackson's footprints toward the tree line where Easy Company had launched their attack the day before. The air grew dense as they approached, each breath becoming laborious. Sounds dampened. The weak winter sunlight seemed unable to fully penetrate the space. This is where Dyke froze, Jackson said, stopping at a seemingly unremarkable patch of snow, where everything went wrong. Carter knelt, brushing away snow to reveal frozen earth beneath. What are we supposed to do now? Jackson closed his eyes. They say, we need to acknowledge them. The parts of ourselves left behind. The men who are still fighting, even though the battle is over. Lipton stepped forward. If we're doing this, we do it properly. He straightened to attention and saluted the empty field. To the men of Easy Company, 506th PIR, 101st Airborne. Your sacrifice is acknowledged. Your battle is over. Stand down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air warmed slightly, a sense of pressure lifting. Webster smiled. I think it worked. An explosion tore through the silence. Real artillery this time, impacting 20 yards to their right. German 88s began to fall around them, no longer phantom sounds, but actual shells. Take cover, Lipton shouted as machine gun fire erupted from the tree line. The Germans had returned, launching a counterattack precisely where the Americans now stood exposed. As they dove for whatever cover they could find, Carter locked eyes with Jackson. Both men understood simultaneously. They hadn't ended the haunting. They'd walked straight into a trap, lured by whatever lingered between worlds in the bloody snow of Foy. The German counterattack lasted 3 hours. Military historians would later record it as a footnote to the Battle of Foy, a desperate, half-strength Wehrmacht company attempting to retake the village before being decisively repulsed by elements of the 101st Airborne. What no history book mentioned was how the men of Easy Company found themselves simultaneously fighting 2 battles, one against flesh-and-blood Germans, and another against something that wore the faces of their friends. Carter and Webster were pinned down behind a fallen tree, German MG-42 fire splintering bark inches above their heads. Through gaps in the wood, Carter glimpsed the German machine gun nest, 3 soldiers operating a weapon that could fire 200 rounds per minute. I count 3, he shouted to Webster over the din, 2 feeding, 1 firing. Webster nodded, checking his ammunition. On 3, covering fire. But as Carter prepared to move, he froze. Behind the German position, emerging from the morning mist, came a figure he recognized immediately, Private Peterson, the man who'd been killed by an 88 shell weeks earlier. Peterson's form flickered like a damaged film reel, his movements jerky yet purposeful as he approached the oblivious German gunners from behind. Peterson looked directly at Carter, raised a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence, then placed a phantom hand on the lead German's shoulder. The German gunner screamed, clutching his chest. The gun fell silent. All across the battlefield, similar scenes unfolded. German soldiers dropped their weapons, faces contorted in terror at enemies only they could see. Within minutes, the counterattack collapsed. As Easy Company cautiously advanced to secure prisoners, Carter saw them, dozens of spectral paratroopers moving among the living soldiers. Some merely observed. Others seemed to guide American fire toward German positions. All wore the uniform of the 101st Airborne. All bore the wounds that had killed them. When the firing finally stopped, Carter found himself standing at the exact spot where Lieutenant Dyke had frozen during the original attack. A cold unlike anything he'd experienced before enveloped him, and the world around him seemed to blur. For one terrible moment, he saw Foy as it existed in multiple times simultaneously. The desperate defense of January 14th, overlaid with the attack of January 13th, and beneath both. Every other moment of violence the village had endured across centuries of European warfare. Then a hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him back to the present. "Grady, you okay?" "Medic says you've been standing here for 10 minutes, not responding." Carter blinked. The battlefield had been secured. Medics tended to wounded from both sides. The ghosts were gone. "Did you see them?" Carter asked. "During the fighting, did you see our dead?" Grady's expression answered before his words could. "They've always been here, Billy. I think part of every soldier stays on the battlefield. Forever." 2 days later, Easy Company was relieved and moved to the relative comfort of Hagenau. The official report made no mention of the supernatural incidents at Foy. Lieutenant Dyke was recorded as suffering combat exhaustion and was transferred to a non-combat role. The psychiatric team, delayed by weather, never arrived. In 1988, William Carter, by then a grandfather of 3 living in Pennsylvania, gave his final interview to a military historian documenting the 101 Airborne's role in the Battle of the Bulge. "The thing about Foy," the elderly Carter said, his eyes still sharp with memory, "is that the fighting never really stopped. Not for some of us." When pressed for clarification, Carter smiled thinly. "History records that we took Foy on January 13, 1945. But for the men who were there, part of us is still fighting in that frozen Belgian village, still dying in the snow." He paused, glancing at something behind the interviewer that no one else could see. "And sometimes, even now, I hear them calling my name." The interview tape ends there. William Carter passed away in his sleep that night. His family reported that his last words, spoken clearly despite his failing health, were, "I'm coming back for you. The battle is finally over." Military archives contain one final, curious note. On the anniversary of the Battle of Foy each year, locals report hearing distant artillery and seeing silhouettes of soldiers moving through the snow-covered fields at dawn. No explanation has ever been officially acknowledged. If this tale from the frozen fields of Foy has marched into your nightmares, take a moment to join the War Maestro's Archive. Listen carefully before you subscribe. Can you hear distant artillery that makes no impact? Perhaps the notification bell sounds eerily, like those Phantom 88s screaming overhead. Share this account with fellow seekers of military horror, who understand that sometimes the most terrifying enemies aren't the ones in the opposing trenches. Leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced that unsettling sensation of being watched while exploring old battlefields? Or perhaps you've heard unexplained voices calling from forests where soldiers once fell? Remember, not all battles end when history claims they do, and somewhere in Foy, Easy Company is still fighting, waiting for you to bear witness to their eternal struggle.